Hi, I'm Liselle Sambury and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things writing, traditional publishing, and a little bit of reading. And this video is the culmination of 3 months of very hard work in which I did a little experiment where I posted a video on TikTok and Instagram Reels every day for 90 days so that I could compare that data to my book sales to see if posting every day can help sell books. As a traditionally published author, that is kind of the lens that I'm coming at it through, as opposed to like an indie or self-pub author, because I myself am a traditionally published author. So that's just the experience I'm presenting today. And I was interested in doing this because I feel like there's a lot of pressure on authors to use social media to not even necessarily help supplement book sales, but in sort of the case that has been recently, as we see some publishers kind of not putting as much push behind books, almost to use social media to become all of the marketing for your book and to help sell copies of your books. And I watch other authors really kind of like stress themselves out and also burn themselves out trying to do this. And so I've always been of the opinion that what you do as an author is not going to hold a candle to what your publisher could do to promote your book. But I understand that it's frustrating if your publisher isn't doing anything. You feel like you have to make up for that somehow. You know, your book is your book baby, it's your art, and you want to see it get out there to people. And so social media becomes this way to kind of do something. And I just wanted to know, or at least kind of see what those results could be. And I became more curious about this as I saw authors who didn't have these like enormous mega followings, but significant followings. I'm talking about 20,000 to like 50,000 followers, and like building that up. And it seemed like, from an outsider perspective, it seemed like they were getting some results from it. And that made me a little bit more interested in kind of trying it out for myself. I will also say that I did work professionally in social media for a time. I worked with some companies, some businesses, that sort of thing, including a company that had over 100,000 followers on their social media. And so that used to be kind of my industry. And so I do find myself generally more interested in social media as a medium. My personal kind of feeling towards it has always just kind of been, I just post whenever I feel like, because again, I don't expect my personal efforts to be doing this huge thing for my sales. And so that's kind of why I've been a little bit looser with it. But I really wanted to see what would happen if I put in dedicated effort to post every day. And so what this video is basically going to encompass is going to be 4 parts. So the first part is going to be me talking about like the format of the experiment. So talking about kind of how I went about filming everything, prepping everything, my sort of thought process into the sort of content that I decided to create. So that's the first part. The second part is the statistical analysis. So this is the hard numbers of basically like social media performance to book sales. I have charts and everything. So that's the next part. The third part is me talking a little bit more about the specific pieces of content that performed at kind of a higher level than average, and like just kind of giving you an idea of what sort of content worked well on the platform for me, at least, in the chances that hopefully maybe that will give you ideas if you're wanting to post yourself on social media. And then the last portion of the video is going to be kind of a reflection in which I talk about essentially whether I thought this was worth it in the end, and how I might proceed with my social media going forward. And I will have timestamps for all of those because I expect this will be a long video, so you have the ability to kind of jump around and look at the different sections if you're more interested in one and less interested in another. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. The format that I used for this whole experiment is that I decided I would make one video that I would share on both platforms, so both TikTok and Instagram. Making two videos would have been wild and to me kind of unnecessary, and I also thought it would be interesting to see how the same piece of content performs on each platform. I picked Instagram and TikTok because these are platforms that I already use, and so I'm not necessarily starting from scratch. I already had a certain amount of followers on each platform, and so I just thought this would be the best way to kind of go about it. And because those platforms have a section at least that's more geared towards that short form content, I thought that would be best. I did not want to do YouTube Shorts because I don't post on YouTube Shorts anyway. I don't particularly like YouTube Shorts, and it didn't feel like the best platform. So that's why I didn't do YouTube Shorts. I focused on TikTok and Instagram, and I decided to do it that way. And then kind of going into the planning phase, how I did this is that I decided to create a content calendar. This is just like, for me, very par for the course for social media, especially when I work professionally in social media. Creating a content calendar is kind of just like, to me, social media 101. It's just kind of how you can organize your content, how you can know when you're going to be posting things, how you can keep track of the content you are doing. And so I did this all in Notion. I created a calendar. And then I basically started slotting in placeholders. I decided that my focus would be on books whose sales I could track, meaning the books that I have that are already released, because I have an author platform through Simon & Schuster that allows me to see my book sales, and I can see those book sales for books that are already out. I cannot see, for example, pre-orders, and in fact, there wasn't really anything on kind of hand for pre-orders for me. I do have a new book coming out, A Mastery of Monsters, but at the time that I was doing the experiment, there are no pre-order links. That being said, sometimes I may have had like a video that was like a different sort of promotional video that I kind of threw in for the day. I only kind of considered one of those in this whole experiment, which was like an announcement thing, but I'll talk about that later. So that was part of my planning phase. I also decided to try and do what I call low effort content, at least in the beginning. I'll talk about when that changed, but at least in the beginning, I decided I wanted to do that more, meaning things that I could like sit in front of the camera and I could hold up my book and I could like put text over top, or I could do like a little bit of like a lip syncing for a few seconds, holding my book and put text over top. Like mostly that is what I wanted to go with, because I figured that would be the kind of most accessible to film and the sort of easiest to do considering the volume that I was looking at. And I also planned to make it so that I would kind of alternate how I talked about the books. So one day I talk about the Blood Like Magic series, another day I talk about Delicious Monsters, and another day I talk about Tender Beasts. So these are kind of like the books that I was focusing on. And so that is pretty much how I started as a basis for planning. And I decided to plan 30 days all at once, so that I could film, edit, and schedule 30 days all at once. For me, batch filming is just a lot more accessible, and allows me to kind of focus in and do all the work in one section instead of trying to like do a video every single day. I felt like that would be way too high load. Much better to just go through a month, or 30 days rather, the 30 days, and plan it and go from there. And the most difficult part of this planning phase was coming up with ideas. Having to come up with 30 days of ideas for things to film was really, really difficult. And so what helped me is looking at the platforms of other authors, and kind of seeing what they were doing. So the main authors that I looked at, and I will put links to their social media down below, was June Her, Gabi Burton, Britney Lewis, and Diana Urban. And I checked out their social media platforms and kind of saw what they were doing, and used that to kind of help me generate some ideas of what sort of things I could talk about maybe, or sort of ways that I could try and showcase my book a little bit, and also just kind of like as an observing tool. For me, working in social media, I find that that was really helpful to kind of see what other people are doing, what sort of trends are hopping on, what's kind of happening in the community, to kind of help you generate ideas a little bit more. So that was also really helpful for me. And I also decided to focus on what I would call reader content. So on YouTube, on my channel here, I do really mostly what I would consider more like writer content. Like it's content for other writers. Mostly other writers will be interested in it. And so that's kind of what I'm doing. But I didn't want to fall into that niche in Instagram and TikTok. I really wanted to focus on like drawing in readers because those are the people that are kind of more likely to buy the book. Though of course writers buy books too, but again, that was kind of my focus on the content. That planning phase took about 3 hours to do for 30 days of content, so that's kind of the amount of time that it took. And then from there, I moved on to the content creation phase. And so what this encompasses to me is the filming of everything, the editing, and also the creating of drafts and like copy, which is like, you know, the description that goes with everything. So doing all of that. And so I basically would set out a filming day. I would change outfits. Was this necessary? I don't know. I think I just wanted to make it look more like I hadn't filmed everything in the same day. And so I was changing outfits for the purposes of kind of like making it seem like it's fresh content all the time. Did that matter? Did people even notice that I was changing outfits? Perhaps not, but I got it into my head that I needed to change outfits. And so I changed outfits and I did it that way. When I first did the 30 days, I did like the same outfit 10 days, same outfit 10 days, same outfit 10 days, or a different outfit. You know what I mean. And then the next time I like changed it so that I reordered the videos so that when I was posting it, it was a different outfit. Like they cycled through so that it wasn't like one video one day I'm wearing outfit, the next video I'm wearing the same outfit. Again, did it matter? I don't know, but I just for whatever reason felt like it was going to matter. So that's what I did. And so I would film those all on one day. And it actually didn't take me as long as I thought it would take me, again, because most of the time what I was doing content wise was just sitting in front of the camera and holding up my book and like smiling. And so that takes only like seconds to film. So it took me about an hour and a half to film all that content. What was the much longer process was the actual editing of that. So for simplicity, I filmed this on my phone and I edited in CapCut, which is like a free program on your phone. This kind of changed towards the very end of this process. So when I started using CapCut, for example, you could do auto captions or auto lyrics or whatever, and you could do that as many times as you wanted for free. Now CapCut has changed it so that if you can only like for free caption 2 videos a month, and then after that you have to pay. And so that process has changed a little bit going forward, but at the time I was doing everything in CapCut because I was able to do everything in CapCut. I also uploaded on there like a custom like font, like the font that I use for my personal branding, so that it kind of looked a little bit more unique. And the reason I like editing videos in CapCut is because I cannot stand on TikTok the way that the video loops while you are editing it. And also because I knew that I was going to use these on both platforms, I didn't want to create it in TikTok and then save it, and then when I post it on Instagram, it's got that little TikTok watermark on it. And so to me, it was best to edit all the content in a separate platform and save that video, and then I could use the video on multiple platforms. It also worked out in cases where there's like a TikTok sound that doesn't exist on Instagram. Then I could kind of put the sound in the video itself and I could still use it on Instagram. And I'm talking about like user created stuff, like kind of like trending sounds, that sort of thing. So that was the process of filming, and then the editing. And from there, what I did is I created drafts on each platform. So on Instagram, you can schedule out, I want to say like 20 days in advance of a post. Like it might even be 30 days. But because I ended up often filming these like ahead of when that 30-day period started. I was kind of outside of the window of being able to schedule on Instagram. So what I decided to do instead is I created drafts of all of the videos. And so when you create a draft, I was able to kind of put in whatever description / copy, choose the thumbnail, blah, 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 basically have the video totally ready to go. And then I saved the draft. And I did that on TikTok as well. And then I set reminders in my phone for every day to remind me to post. And so every day I would then go into the draft and I would post it. But I suppose I should have talked about that in the posting section, but alas, I've already talked about it now. So that's why I created drafts. And when it came to coming up with like copy or description, kind of what to put in there, I tried to keep it as simple as possible. And I just kind of did it on the fly while I was scheduling. The last thing that I wanted to do is like do long involved descriptions for every video, just because the video volume was so high. I didn't want to get caught up in doing that. And so I tried to do quick kind of one sentence sorts of captions so that I wasn't having to do kind of a long involved process. For the posting phase, as I said, I set reminders in my phone. And so at the beginning, so for those kind of like first 30 days-ish, I posted on both platforms at 12 p.m. EST. And then I realized later that it was better to post at night for TikTok. And so I changed it up a bit. At first, I posted both Instagram and TikTok at 6 p.m. I found that Instagram started to do poorly when I did that. So I changed it back, Instagram at 12 p.m. and TikTok at 6 p.m. And that seemed to be the best way to do it for me, like manually having to do that posting. The manual posting itself to me like takes like a few seconds. It wasn't really that much sweat off my back. And so that wasn't really a time I kind of included, but it meant that every day, twice a day, I had to like stop whatever I was doing and make sure that I posted these things. There was a possibility that I could have paid for a paid program, something like later, and then it would have let me schedule even on TikTok possibly. I think I would have had to change. I'm already a TikTok creator account, but I might have had to change to a business account. Essentially, I could have paid for something in order to get some of these things scheduled, but I decided not to do that. I just wanted to do it on the fly with things I already had. And so after that kind of posting phase was the kind of collection of data phase. So on Instagram and on TikTok, you have access to 90 days of analytics. So I didn't necessarily have to make sure that I was taking note of analytics every single day, because I would be able to use like to be able to see 90 days of data all at once. So that was the case for TikTok and Instagram. And then when it came to my book sales, however, it was a different sort of situation. So on the book sales platform, it'll only show me about like a month at a time. And so I did have to kind of regularly check in on that in order to note down those numbers, because if you miss that window, you don't get to see them again. And the book sales in the portal are POS sales. So meaning when somebody comes in and buys a book, it's those sales, versus what I get in my royalty statement is like bulk sales. So it's what's actually being sold to the bookstores. And so what's in your royalty statement and what pops up on that platform are different. So just to kind of give you an idea there. And so it was best for me to just use the platform because I felt like that would also give me the most kind of like reaction-based data, such that if like something on my social media was affecting people going in to buy books, I think that's kind of the data that was most interesting or made the most sense. And so that's what I was collecting. And so I just collected that in like a Google Sheets form. So that was how I did the data collection portion of this whole experiment. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the things that changed over the course of the experiment and some of the things I adjusted. So while I was doing this, I was paying attention to how things were performing on a sort of like ad hoc basis. Like I would check up and I would see what seemed to be resonating with people and what didn't. And so then when I went to do the next chunk of 30 days of content, I would change up the content based on what I had learned. So in that second month, I had a thought or a theory, I suppose, that maybe watch time would be better. And so in order to try and get people to watch more, I started putting in more content of me conversationally talking, which made kind of longer videos that were kind of like more like 3 to 4 minutes, as opposed to my previous videos, which were like 15 seconds on average, because it was just me holding up my book and putting text over top. So I started adding those in to see if those would engage people more and get me a longer watch time, which would then perform better maybe. And what I kind of found across platforms is that was not the case. It was not the case. And so by the time I got to the last 30 days, I stopped doing that and I went right back to doing content that was just kind of like me popping up and holding my book and putting text over top for 15 seconds. Again, and these are kind of like, I guess, a sort of general disclaimer for all of these results. This is my platform, and I know that the people on my platform, the audience that I've cultivated, is going to be different for every kind of author or person. And so it's not to say that like talking content just universally doesn't work. I'm on YouTube here. The talking is all I do. And it has a very different result. And so it's not only different per platform, it's also different based on the audience you've cultivated. So just because something worked or didn't work for me doesn't mean it won't work or not work for you. It's kind of like an individual experience, but I just wanted to share why I kind of switched up content in that way. At a certain point, I also started doing a series on TikTok, a drafting series, which you may be familiar because I've been posting the compilations on YouTube, in which I posted every weekday that I was working on my book, just like a talking video of me working on my book. And so this was just kind of, for me, I wondered if something that seemed more casual or more conversational, as opposed to me being like done up with makeup and an outfit, I wondered, and something that was like a series people could follow, I wondered how that might resonate on TikTok, which was like a platform I was struggling more with during this process. And so I started doing that. So at a certain period of time in that last kind of 30 days, I was posting 2 times on TikTok. Originally I was splitting it between noon and 6 p.m. and then at a certain point I was just posting both videos at 6 p.m. And just going forward with that. So I will say that at a certain point on TikTok I was posting not just once a day, actually twice a day, because I was doing that content as well. And now on to the statistical analysis, which is what I assume that most of you will be interested in, the cold hard facts, the numbers. And before I get fully into those, I just want to share some kind of like overall in terms of like follower growth. So on Instagram, during that 90-day period, I grew by 443 followers. And on TikTok, I grew by 171 followers. So there was a pretty big distance between them, as you will see. But that was kind of the growth. And what I would also like to preface before I go into this data is that this is correlational data, meaning that I am looking at 2 sets of data and I am kind of speculating as to whether one could have influenced the other. But correlation does not mean causation. So just because I had, like, let's say a jump on social media and then I saw a jump in book sales does not necessarily mean that those book sales came from social media. There's no way for me as a traditionally published author to measure that. If it was kind of like my own platform, as things have been in the past when I've worked with businesses, there are ways to track things, to track how people are clicking and where people are clicking from, to kind of get a bit more causation in that way. But I'm not able to do that because I don't control the platforms in which my books are kind of being sold or that data, that sort of thing. So this is really pure speculation, but correlation I do think is still interesting to look at and can sometimes like give you kind of an idea or a feel of how things are going. But again, it's possible that like someone saw my social media post and didn't buy the book until like weeks later, or maybe they saw my social media post and they heard a friend tell them about it and they saw a good review of it, and then they went into Barnes and Noble and the bookseller talked about it, or it was on a flashy table and they were like, oh yeah, I just saw a post about that. You know, like there are so many different touchstones, but I wanted to just kind of look at the data anyway to see what could be seen. So that's what we're going to get into. And here we are with the graphs. So in that top graph, you can see I have Instagram views versus TikTok views. The TikTok views are red, the Instagram views are blue. I will say that I did measure engagement, so things like likes and comments, etc. And I found that they followed the view count pretty close. So essentially, if the views had a peak, so did the engagement. So I decided to just solely do views versus the book sales for that reason. And the book sales are here on the bottom for confidentiality purposes. I have not put the number of the book sales there, and it is very different also than the view count. Of course, you usually, I would imagine, get like higher views on social media than you do books, which is why I had to separate them into their own charts so that you could actually see the peaks and valleys. But yeah, that's kind of everything out of the way. We can go ahead and start talking about the actual data we're looking at here. So what I did find interesting is that in this first week, when I had that more kind of viral video, there is a sort of higher peak of the social media performance. It doesn't really exactly match. But there's a possibility that maybe there was a little bit of a delay. Maybe as the video grew and more people saw it, maybe more people were inclined to buy some of those books, perhaps, or maybe there is really nothing to do with the social media versus those books. And so we see in week 2 when those stats seem to be coming down is when we have that peak. So yeah, maybe there's a delay or maybe it has nothing to do with it. And then what I did find interesting is as we go to weeks 2 to 4, we do see both social media and book sales kind of trending down, and then going back up from week 4. It's not the same level of kind of valley that the book sales have. It's not quite as sharp, but it is still following that trajectory. It goes back up during that 5th week. Social media goes down a little bit more, while the book sales just kind of go down slightly towards week 6 there. And then in week 7, we get that kind of sharp dip in book sales that doesn't really seem to match up to the social media. In fact, there's a little bit of a peak there in Instagram that is clearly not reflected in those sales. And then social media goes down into week 8. We actually come back up with a peak there. Social media, TikTok goes to have a peak in week 9, and Instagram goes down in that week. And we also see book sales kind of down in that week. And then all of a sudden, there's a big jump from weeks kind of 9 to 11. I will say right now, the time period of which that is happening is the time period that the Barnes and Noble 50% off hardcover sales is happening. I feel very, very confident in saying those results are from that hardcover sale. In this book sales section, I'm showing the book sales for all of my books, but when I had looked at it, it was specifically Tender Beasts, who was the book on sale for 50%, that was showing that large jump in numbers. And so that's why I feel very confident in saying it's the Barnes & Noble 50% off sale. I also noticed this happening last year when it happened. There was a 50% off sale hardcovers, and I also noticed a very large jump in my sales around that time. And you'll see that this peak we have in week 11 is actually the highest peak that we have. And then from there, it starts to go back down to more of the kind of lower end of what my sales tend to be in that little third quadrant there, first from the top, while
social media. In week 12, kind of TikTok goes down a little bit, but Instagram has a peak, and then they sort of seem to level out to a similar-ish amount in that 13 week, while the book sales kind of are trending down at that point. So I think what I thought was interesting, or kind of most interesting about this data, was that beginning part, those kind of like weeks, like 1 to 5, I would say, where it does really feel like the shape of the line, like the trending up and down, is kind of similar to the social media trending up and down at that time. Again, this is correlational data, so maybe it just happened to be like that and they have nothing to do from each other. But I think the fact that those weeks 1 to kind of 3 were a larger than normal peak, like from what you can see, my book sales, if we think of this graph as divided into those 4 quadrants, my book sales tend to stay around that second from the top sort of quadrant. And I would say anything in that top quadrant is like, you know, sales that I would pay attention to, like it's higher than normal. And so I do wonder if the fact that I had that video that had done so well in that beginning of the week. And again, I was still getting comments on this video like into the second week. Like even as it was trending down, like it was longer lasting than my other videos. And so I do wonder if perhaps there was some effect of that video on the sales because it was such a high number of views for me. But of course we could see that is not in fact as high as the Barnes & Noble sale. And it's funny because I was talking to a friend about this and they were like, oh no, now Barnes & Noble will have more power over authors and we'll all have to scramble to make graphics. But it's interesting because when I look at this and I'm looking at that social media graph in comparison, I don't really get the feeling that my social media post about the sale really did anything. So I don't think that people have to rush out to try making graphics. I just don't really get the feeling that it was the push there. And I will say around the Barnes & Noble sale, to also give some additional context, Tender Beast was featured in one of Barnes & Noble's newsletters promoting the sale. It was on some tables, and Delicious Monsters was a monthly pick last year. And so I assume that maybe that's granted me a little bit more attention from Barnes & Noble, and so perhaps I was getting a little bit more better positioning with my book, and so that's why that was happening. And again, that attention from Barnes & Noble kind of also stems back to my sales team really pushing the book when it was Delicious Monsters time a while ago. So I really feel like that only that kind of beginning part seemed to have been something I could see as significant. And considering that, I do want to say it's actually not that huge of a jump either, which is interesting because I would think that something that got that many views, I'd see something like really like out there, but it actually is just kind of a few more books than usual. Yeah, so I just thought that's kind of all my thoughts on those stats.
Now I'm going to talk about the content that worked, which I'm wrapping in air quotes because like everything else in this video, it really depends. This is really the results from my platform, but maybe the things that I talk about will give you a little bit of insight into what might be something you might want to post about or put on your platform, or at least maybe you're just curious about what kind of seemed to resonate with my audiences the most. And I'm going to separate these into Instagram and TikTok because what performed on each platform had some overlap, but was also like pretty different. So I am going to look at my phone for this to give you the exact numbers so that I do not have to memorize everything. But I will talk through things. So the top 5 on Instagram, the top video was that semi-viral video, and so it was basically a video where I talked about when I sold Blood Like Magic. It was for a more modest advance, and I wasn't sure that the book was going to do well, and I started to sort of, you know, get a little bit in my head about it, and then the book did in fact do quite well. You know, I earned out in under a year of both books of the series. It got nominated for a Governor General Award. I was Junior Library Guild pick, you know, all the many wonderful things that happened to the book despite me having a modest advance and worrying that that meant that my book wasn't going to do well. So that got 30,000.9 views. So that was definitely by far and by large the best performing video. The second best performing video was a video where I talked about the male love interest that I read in books growing up and the love interest that I created for the book, which was Luke from Blood Like Magic. And that got 5.8 thousand views. I'm trying to think of like how to say my own number. And then the third video, so this was a video that was a little bit different. This was my announcement about A Mastery of Monsters becoming a trilogy. And so I decided to just kind of slot that in and use that. And I believe that I exchanged it for a video. I didn't like, you know, post it in addition. Like I swapped things up so that I would have one less video to plan for the next month or the next 30 days. And that got 4.9 thousand, which, you know, I feel like is fair for like an announcement video. Anyway, I'll talk more about why I think the content worked in a second. The fourth highest was a video where I talked about when writing gets hard, I give up. This is where I did like a bit of a longer caption after to kind of contextualize what I was talking about. And then the fifth one was a video about how readers said they were scared to read horror, but they decided to try out Delicious Monsters anyway and ended up loving it, which is something that I do hear from a lot of people, which was great. And that was 3.4 thousand views. So thinking generally about why these videos might have done well, like in terms of like the one that was like the most viral, best performing, I do understand that like people like to, you know, people like underdog stories essentially, you know, people I think like to hear that, you know, you started off being unsure about something and then it actually turned out really well for you. A friend also mentioned to me that like it's possible it did well because it's sort of insider information. I know that I'm on here on YouTube with all you guys and I'm yapping all the time about all my business. So I feel like you all know all my business. And I forget that I don't really do that on Instagram or on TikTok. These are platforms that I've been, I would say much less, I suppose, like open on. I feel like I'm the most open on YouTube. And so I forget that people don't really know those things, even though I talk all the time on YouTube about blah, 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 I have modest advance and da, 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 da. I don't really do that on other platforms. And so, you know, a friend had suggested to me that that might be why that had done better on Instagram, because it was kind of like insider information. Like a lot of people on there might not have known that I had gotten a more modest advance. I will say also on Instagram, I do follow a lot of authors. And so I have a lot of authors also following me on that platform. So it might have also resonated in that way on Instagram in a way that it didn't necessarily on TikTok. Because those are more authors, they maybe sympathize with that sort of experience. And I will say like they're more authors that I've like known or interacted with in some way. And so I also feel like maybe people know me more personally on that platform. And so that creates a little bit more of that interaction. Whereas I feel like on TikTok, I've more cultivated, I suppose, more of a reader audience, and they maybe don't know me as well because I mostly just post like lip sync stuff on there and like little things I think are funny. I don't have a lot of like, you know, in terms of the like sharing of Liselle's life sort of score, like YouTube is at the top and then like Instagram and then TikTok like way at the bottom. So that may also have been why it had done a little bit better. And for the others, I'm not really sure. Announcements I do know tend to do well, so it makes sense for the A Mastery of Monsters announcement of it being a trilogy. The others, I can't really guess why one resonated more than the other. Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. And the top 5 for TikTok, the number 1 video on TikTok was a video where I said if you liked The Haunting of Hill House, The Perfection, and The Conjuring, you should read Delicious Monsters. And that was a 6 6.1 thousand. That one got 6.1 thousand views. And then the second best was the Mastery of Monsters announcement, the same one from Instagram. That was 2.5 thousand. And then the third one was the same one talking about the male love interest. That was 1.8 thousand. And then the fourth popular one was me talking about how, you know, I'd been told that like genre blends don't sell, but I did one anyway. And it was like kind of a funny video. I like put on sunglasses. I did a lip sync thing. That was one of the videos that I thought was really funny. I like laughed by myself for possibly too long. And then the last one was talking about how, when I was younger and I read books, I didn't expect to see black girls like me in them, and so I wrote a book where a black girl was the hero, which was Blood Like Magic, and that was 1.4 thousand. I can't remember if I said the genre blend one, that was also 1.4 thousand. There was like some small difference in the smaller amounts. And as you can see, the things that, even when they performed well on TikTok, they were performing significantly under what was performing on Instagram. And TikTok, honestly, I could not say what that platform likes or doesn't like for me. I continue to be befuddled, bamboozled. I truly don't understand what works on that platform. I think I used to feel like maybe I did, and now I just have absolutely no idea. I could not tell you why a video of me being like, if you like these things, try out this book, which I did for every single book. For every single book, I did a video like that, where I was like, if you like these things, try out this book. If you like these things, try out this. I did that for all of the books. And why the one about Delicious Monsters picked up and resonated with people on TikTok, who could tell you? Who could tell you? I certainly couldn't. So, but those are the pieces of content that seem to perform the best. Again, some of these I get it, and some of these could not tell you. Back to the question from the beginning of this video. Does posting every day sell books? And to me, the answer is perhaps, but certainly not as much as one might think. I do, you know, I remember when we looked at those charts, there were some sort of like trending seeming ups and downs that kind of seemed to follow social media performance, but wasn't really consistent enough, wasn't high enough of a peak to sort of feel like, yeah, doing all of this was 100% worth it in terms of sales. And I think what I came away from in the 90 days more than anything was that, okay, if I had a really big peak, like a really huge viral video, or close to like I had with that sort of, you know, 30,000 view video, maybe that could have been the reason for that slight peak in sales. But again, it was so slight, and you cannot control virality. You just can't. You can't. And so what it kind of made me feel like was like the day-to-day content, like the sort of something that's a little bit more achievable. Some of those saw a little bit of a flow with sales, but again, not really that much. And then that big peak came from things that, again, I think are more publisher effort kind of ended, like that Barnes & Noble sale, because it's not just the sale. Again, not every book was included in that sale, and because of the sort of extra things that I talked about, I just feel like those sorts of things are more publisher weighted, which to me kind of leans a little bit more on that edge of like what your publisher can do having the biggest, largest impact, as opposed to these personal efforts. But that is not to say that the personal effort and the social media is worth nothing. I think that in the long term, there could potentially be benefits. My last clip for this video just straight up disappeared, couldn't tell you what happened to it, and so here I am during the editing process to finish off my thought. So what I was saying was essentially that I feel like social media can have long-lasting effects. I do feel like it's a great community building sort of tool, and I do think that over time, as people build up a following and are consistent on the platform, it's very possible that you might end up with a large following who are very engaged, who want to buy your books, and that you see that sort of result from social media, from your efforts on social media in particular, and you start to see that pick up, or you see more readers talking about it more, etc., etc. I just feel like it's word of mouth, and at the end of the day, word of mouth is a very powerful tool, and so it's entirely possible, of course, that social media can have that sort of effect. And I'm talking about outside of those authors who are experiencing virality. I'm talking about like what is possible for the average author who's just kind of like hopping on social media and trying it out and never gets those sorts of like super viral numbers. And so that's kind of my feeling about social media, and how I would like to use it is in terms of a community building tool. But what I think is perhaps misplaced, and certainly I think put too much pressure on authors, is a pressure that authors maybe put on themselves, or maybe even publishers or other people are putting on them, to kind of like hop on social media like 2 to 3 months before your book comes out and suddenly have all of these like giant amazing sales based on how your social media is performing. I just find that to be a really unrealistic standard. I think even if you hopped on 6 months in advance and started promoting at that time, I don't even know necessarily that that would create those sorts of results. It's just very, I think, difficult to do that. And I feel like there is, I don't know, and perhaps this is just me, but I feel like there is this illusion that kind of circles around in traditional publishing that like says that like, you gotta hop on social media so that you can sell books and blah, 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 blah. When in fact, like getting those sorts of results from social media that would lead to sales, that you could see that impact, I just feel like that's really like unlikely for someone that's kind of like just jumping in the game at like 6 months or 3 months. I just find that to be just deeply unrealistic. And so I feel like my hope with this video is that more authors will kind of like, be easier on yourselves and not put so much pressure on yourself for social media to create these like big sales results, because it just kind of feels like that is very difficult to achieve. And I would hope that like there's more kind of focus on goals that are a little bit more long term, because it just kind of, even like you see I had that video that got like 30,000 views. If that was responsible for that little uptick of sales that I saw, it was not even like this huge amount. So it's kind of like, even if you get a video with like 30,000 views, like it's to see like, okay, is that what it's being, that's what's being garnered, like that little kind of slight increase of sales, and I feel like it's not to the level that expectations are created around. And so anyway, that is all to say that really what I wanted to do is like a takeaway from this is, please authors, be kinder to yourselves, be easier on yourselves, and not kind of expect social media to create these huge book sale results. And I think for me personally, my takeaway, certainly I will not be posting every day. I will not be doing that. But I have decided that I do want to post 3 days a week. And so my plan is that I will be posting 2 videos and 1 photo. So 3 posts for the week. Of course, I am still doing that drafting series right now. So right now I'm posting every weekday, which, should I have done that? Nah. But I wanted to do something that felt casual, that was a series, and that could help kind of build more of a casual rapport on that platform. And I really do feel like my attitude attitude, which was really my attitude before, but it's kind of continued, is that I really see social media as a community building tool, as a place for me to engage with readers or other authors who are interested in my books, interested in my work, and like getting them hyped up about that, keeping them abreast of news that's coming out, and kind of just doing it like that and not having an expectation of selling books. And I think if I was going to have an expectation of anything, then maybe it would be, okay, maybe my audience, if I engage them regularly, maybe they'll be more likely to like pre-order the book, or buy it the day it comes out, instead of like, oh, I'll just wait for a month before I go do it, because we know for authors those pre-orders and those first week sales can mean a lot to publishers, even though of course they don't predict the lifetime of the book, but publishers really like them. So and that's where that power to actually sell books, in my opinion, really comes from. But yeah, that's kind of my takeaway from it, and that's why I'm gonna continue to try and be consistent on those platforms, to keep building my community on those platforms, as opposed to, you know, having an expectation of sales. And so that's pretty much what I will say about that. Again, I feel like it's fair to want social media to garner you sales as an author. I feel like that's totally cool. I just feel like I see so many authors like putting so much pressure on themselves and like burning out, and like I'm a full-time author, so I was doing this social media stuff like in addition, like, you know, I do this full time, and you know, I can't imagine people who have a day job trying to now do writing, which is a second job really, and then add on the third job of trying to do all this social media stuff and just burning out so hard that you struggle to write, which is the thing that you're here for. And so yeah, that is in a very lengthy way so to say, please authors, you know, stop putting so much pressure on yourselves, and give yourself a little bit of slack, a little bit of a break, a little bit of understanding, and empathy, because getting huge sales results from your social media is very difficult, and I think it's really downplayed how difficult it is. And I think I feel like a lot of time there's this sort of mystique that you can just hop on there and create a result, and that's really not the case. So with that, yeah, I will say that is really why I've kind of, you know, decided to do that consistency. And to leave off, I wanted to talk about a really positive outcome that came from doing this, that came from this whole experiment. And that was really like the wonderful readers who commented on those posts. I really, for whatever reason, just hadn't expected people to be like, I don't know, I guess I thought some people would comment, but I guess I didn't really think that much about it. And I got all these wonderful comments from people when I would make a video saying how much they enjoyed learning more about the book or the process, how the book was their favorite, how they loved the books, how they have been like reading all of my books, which is wild. And just like, that was really nice for me. It was really, really validating. I've been, you know, on a journey to really separate me feeling the success of my books from monetary success. I wasn't looking at my sales all this year, but I did have to look to do this experiment. But I've really been on that journey just for myself and my own peace. And so to me, you know, all my books are successful. I love them. There are all these things I love about each book. And I try and focus on that. But it was still really nice and validating to know that my words are reaching people and that they are having wonderful, positive experiences with the book. And I just feel like that feeling, that sense of community is what, to me, makes social media kind of worth it, and like doing all those things worth it, is like I'm interacting with those people and I'm forming, you know, different sorts of relationships with those people, and I think focusing on that audience that is there and engaging them, as opposed to hoping for some magical giant audience that's going to come and buy all my books, I just feel like time, mental energy, and joy is better spent in that. And that's kind of my kind of like you know, I've had many takeaways, but that's a big takeaway for me. And that was a result that I wasn't really thinking about or anticipating. And it was really just like wonderful. So thank you so much if you like commented on my stuff about liking my books. And of course, people that always comment here on my YouTube channel, thank you. Yeah, that was like a very positive, unexpected positive outcome. And with that, I will leave you there. If you have any questions about this whole experiment thing or what I did, or you just want to like share your feelings about authors and social media, feel free to put that in the comments and share with all of that. Or even if you're like an indie author or self-pub author and you have like a very different sort of outlook on social media than the like traditional point of view, at least one traditional point of view that I presented, please comment that and share things. I always find it really interesting to see how it is with different people and like doing different sort of writing paths. Like I think that's really cool. So yeah, that's about it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.